The snow fell harder than Marcus Blackwood had seen in 20 years of tracking through the Montana wilderness. Each flake cut through the December air like tiny glass shards, accumulating on his shoulders and the brim of his worn leather hat. His breath formed white clouds that dissipated quickly in the bitter wind, and his fingers had long since gone numb despite the thick gloves he wore. The temperature had dropped to 15 below zero, turning the forest into a crystalline cathedral of ice-covered pines and frozen streams. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Marcus adjusted the weight of his pack and checked his compass. For the third time in an hour, the needle pointed steadily northwest, toward the remote cabin he'd inherited from his grandfather 6 months ago. A cabin he'd never seen, in a valley he'd never explored, left to him by a man he'd barely known. The old man had been a hermit, living alone in the wilderness for 40 years after returning from Vietnam. Marcus's father had spoken of him only in whispers, calling him touched and broken by the war. But now, at 34, Marcus understood something about being broken. His marriage to Sarah had ended 8 months ago when she discovered his gambling debts had consumed their savings, their house, and her trust. The divorce papers had been signed in September, the same week he'd lost his job at the construction company for showing up drunk 3 days in a row. His sister Emma had found him passed out in his truck outside a casino in Billings, vomit frozen to his beard 24 hours after he'd missed his court-mandated addiction counseling session. The intervention had been swift and merciless. Emma, his younger brother David, and their mother had cornered him in the hospital waiting room. Their faces were masks of disappointment and exhausted love. His mother's eyes, once warm and full of pride when she looked at him, now held only worry and a sadness so deep it made his chest ache. She'd been the one to suggest the cabin. "Your grandfather left it to you for a reason, Marcus," she'd said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Maybe it's time you found out what that reason was. The lawyers said there's enough land to keep you busy, and God knows you need time away from everything that's pulling you down." David had been less diplomatic. "You're killing yourself, and you're killing Mom watching you do it. Either you go up there and figure your shit out, or we're done." All of us. The ultimatum had stung, but it had also been a relief. For the first time in 2 years, someone else was making the decision for him. The cabin represented a kind of exile, but also a possibility he couldn't name. So he'd loaded his truck with supplies, winter gear, and the few possessions Sarah hadn't claimed in the divorce, and headed north toward the Glacier National Park region, where his grandfather's property sat like a forgotten secret in the wilderness. The drive had taken 12 hours through increasingly remote roads. The last 30 miles had been on a dirt track that wound through dense forest, climbing steadily into the mountains. By the time he'd reached the end of the road, where a rusted mailbox marked Blackwood stood beside a barely visible trail, the sun was setting and snow had begun to fall. He'd parked the truck at the trailhead and shouldered his pack, knowing the cabin was still 2 miles deeper into the woods. The trail had been overgrown and difficult to follow, marked only by occasional blazes carved into tree trunks decades earlier. Night fell quickly in the mountains, and by the time he'd been walking for an hour, his flashlight beam was the only source of light in the endless darkness of the forest. That had been 6 hours ago. Now, with dawn still hours away and the storm intensifying, Marcus was beginning to understand why his grandfather had chosen this place for his solitude. The wilderness here was absolute, untouched by civilization any meaningful way. There were no power lines, no cell towers, no distant hum of traffic. Just the wind through the pines, the crunch of snow under his boots, and the occasional crack of a tree branch heavy with ice. His grandfather, Thomas Blackwood, had been a decorated Marine who'd served 2 tours in Vietnam before disappearing into the Montana mountains in 1975. The family had received postcards for a few years, Brief messages that confirmed he was alive, but revealed nothing about his life. The cards had stopped coming in the early 80s, and for decades, everyone had assumed the old man was dead. It wasn't until a Forest Service ranger had found his body last spring, peacefully deceased in his sleep at the age of 78, that the family learned he'd been living as a complete recluse for nearly half a century. The lawyer who'd handled the estate had been amazed by what Thomas had accomplished in his isolation. The property included not just the original cabin, but also a workshop, a greenhouse, a root cellar, and a complex system of solar panels and water collection that made the homestead completely self-sufficient. There were detailed journals documenting 40 years of observations about wildlife, weather patterns, and forest management. Most surprisingly, there was a substantial savings account that had been fed by occasional sales of handcrafted furniture to a gallery in Kalispell, furniture so beautiful and unique that it had commanded premium prices from collectors across the country. Marcus had inherited all of it, along with a brief letter that simply read, "For the grandson who carries the weight, the mountain will teach you what I couldn't. Trust the silence." He'd puzzled over those words for months, but now, struggling through the storm with exhaustion pulling at his legs and doubt gnawing at his resolve, he was beginning to understand what his grandfather might have meant. The wilderness demanded complete presence. There was no room for regret about the past or anxiety about the future, when every step required careful attention to avoid falling into a hidden ravine or walking off a cliff in the darkness. The beam of his flashlight caught something ahead, a dark shape that resolved into the corner of a building. His heart leaped with relief as he approached what was clearly a substantial cabin, much larger than he'd expected. The structure was built from massive logs, expertly fitted and chinked, with a steep metal roof designed to shed heavy snow loads. A wide covered porch wrapped around the front and sides, and several outbuildings were visible in the shadows beyond. Marcus climbed the steps to the front door, his legs trembling with fatigue and cold. The key the lawyer had given him turned easily in the lock, and the door swung open to reveal a space that took his breath away. The main room was spacious and warm, heated by the residual heat from a large stone fireplace. Handcrafted furniture filled the space, chairs, tables, and cabinets that displayed the same extraordinary craftsmanship he'd seen in the photos from the gallery. The walls were lined with bookshelves, and oil lamps provided soft, steady light, but it was the silence that struck him most powerfully. After months of living with the constant noise of his own thoughts, the endless loop of self-recrimination, an anxiety that had driven him to gambling, drinking, and ultimately to this exile, the profound quiet of the cabin felt like a physical presence. It wasn't empty silence. It was full, rich, expectant. It was the silence his grandfather had spoken of in the letter. Marcus set down his pack and moved through the cabin, exploring rooms that revealed the depth of his grandfather's self-sufficiency. The kitchen was equipped with a wood-burning stove, hand-pumped well water, and shelves lined with preserved foods. The bedroom contained a simple but beautifully crafted bed, covered with quilts that were clearly handmade. A study was filled with journals, maps, and what appeared to be decades of correspondence with wildlife biologists and Forest Service personnel. It was in the study that Marcus found the photographs. Hundreds of them, all taken in the surrounding wilderness, documenting the seasons, the wildlife, and the subtle changes in the forest over decades. But it was one particular series of photos that stopped him cold. They showed wolves, not just individual animals, but an entire pack that had clearly been photographed over many years. The images captured intimate moments: wolves playing, hunting, raising cubs, mourning their dead. These weren't the work of a casual observer. They revealed a relationship, a deep understanding between the photographer and his subjects. At the bottom of the stack was a photo that made Marcus's hands shake. It showed his grandfather, much younger, sitting calmly in a forest clearing while 3 wolves rested nearby. The old man's face was serene, almost radiant, and the wolves looked completely at ease in his presence. On the back, in his grandfather's careful handwriting, was a single line. "They taught me what love looks like without fear." Marcus studied the photo for a long time, trying to reconcile the peaceful man in the image with the troubled veteran who had fled civilization. What had happened in these mountains to transform someone so completely? And why had he left this place, this legacy, to a grandson he'd never really known? Outside, the storm continued to rage, but inside the cabin, Marcus felt something he hadn't experienced in years: genuine curiosity about something other than his own pain. He built a fire in the stone fireplace, using seasoned wood from the neat stack beside the hearth, and settled into one of his grandfather's chairs with a journal dated from 1976, the year after Thomas had arrived in the mountains. The first entry was brief. Day 127. The silence is different here. It doesn't echo with ghosts. As Marcus read, a picture emerged of a man slowly healing from wounds that went deeper than anything physical. The early entries were filled with nightmares, flashbacks, and a paranoia that made every sound in the forest a potential threat. But gradually, as the months passed, the tone shifted. Thomas began writing about the animals he observed, the changing seasons, the satisfaction of building something with his hands, and eventually, he wrote about the wolves. Day 342, saw the pack again today. 7 adults, 3 pups. The alpha female watched me from 50 yards while I worked on the roof. No fear, no aggression, just awareness, like she's taking my measure. The entries that followed documented a relationship unlike anything Marcus had ever heard of. His grandfather had slowly, patiently earned the trust of the wolf pack that claimed the territory around his cabin. Not by feeding them or trying to domesticate them, but by simply existing in their world with respect and consistency. He learned their patterns, their territories, their family dynamics. And over time, they accepted him as a benign presence in their wilderness. Day 891. The alpha female brought her new cubs close to the cabin today. She wanted me to see them. I think she knows I would never harm them, but more than that, I think she trusts my judgment about other humans. As if she's made me part of her pack security system. The more Marcus read, the more he understood that his grandfather had found something in the wilderness that went beyond mere solitude. He had found a way of being that was fundamentally different from the human world, a way of existing without the fear, competition, and violence that had marked his experience in the war. The wolves had been his teachers, showing him that it was possible to be strong without being aggressive, to be protective without being paranoid, to love without possessing. The fire burned low as Marcus continued reading, but he barely noticed the cold. For the first time in months, his mind wasn't circling endlessly around his failures and regrets. Instead, he found himself wondering about the wolves his grandfather had known. Were they still here? Had the pack survived the 40 years since these photos were taken? And if they had, would they remember the strange human who had once lived among them with such respect and gentleness? As dawn finally began to lighten the windows of the cabin, Marcus closed the journal and looked around at the life his grandfather had built. Every object, every carefully crafted piece of furniture, every thoughtfully planned improvement to the homestead, spoke of a man who had found peace through patient work and deep connection to the natural world. It was a legacy that felt both inspiring and daunting. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Marcus had come to the mountains to escape his failures, but now he began to suspect that his grandfather had left him something far more valuable than a place to hide. He had left him a template for a different way of being human, one that his grandfather had learned from creatures most people considered dangerous and wild. The question now was whether Marcus had the courage and patience to learn the same lessons. Outside, The storm was beginning to clear, and the first pale light of morning revealed a landscape transformed by snow. The forest stretched endlessly, in all directions, pristine and silent, holding secrets that might take a lifetime to understand. Marcus walked to the window and looked out at his inheritance, not just the cabin and the land, but the opportunity to discover what his grandfather had found in the wilderness. Somewhere in that vast expanse of forest, wolves were beginning their day, following patterns and relationships that had sustained them for generations. Marcus didn't know if he would ever see them, much less earn their trust as his grandfather had. But for the first time since his life had fallen apart, he felt something stirring in his chest that might have been hope. The third week of December brought a cold snap that turned the mountain air brittle as glass. Marcus had fallen into a routine that surprised him with its simplicity and satisfaction. Each morning, he rose before dawn to stoke the fire and prepare coffee in the old percolator his grandfather had left behind. The ritual had become sacred to him, the precise measurement of grounds, the careful regulation of heat, the patient waiting as the rich aroma filled the cabin's main room. He spent his days exploring the property, following trails his grandfather had marked with subtle blazes carved into tree bark. The old man had created an intricate network of paths that led to various observation points, each carefully chosen for optimal wildlife viewing. Marcus found lean-to shelters positioned at strategic locations, all stocked with emergency supplies, and equipped with comfortable seating for long watches out in the evenings. He read through more of Thomas's journals, absorbing 40 years of accumulated wisdom about survival, craftsmanship, and the delicate art of coexisting with apex predators. The entries revealed a man who had gradually shed the hypervigilance and rage that had followed him home from Southeast Asia, replacing them with a profound understanding of natural rhythms and relationships. Day 1247. The old alpha died today. Found him by the creek, peaceful as if he'd simply decided to sleep. The pack mourned him for 3 days, howling songs that raised the hair on my arms. Death here isn't hidden or sanitized. It's acknowledged, grieved, and then life continues. There's honesty in that which civilized people have forgotten. Marcus had been reading entries from 1982 when he first heard them. The sound drifted through the cabin walls like something from a dream, a low, melodic howling that seemed to come from multiple directions at once. He set down the journal and moved to the window, peering out into the moonlit forest. The snow-covered landscape appeared empty, but the vocalizations continued, weaving together in harmonies that spoke of family, territory, and ancient communications he couldn't begin to understand. For 20 minutes, he stood transfixed, listening to what his grandfather's journals had taught him to recognize as a pack assembly call. Somewhere in the darkness, wolves were gathering. Perhaps to hunt, perhaps simply to reaffirm their bonds. When the howling finally faded, Marcus remained at the window for another hour, hoping for a glimpse of movement, but the forest had returned to its vast silence. The next morning brought fresh snow and tracks. Marcus discovered them while checking the solar panel array that powered the cabin's modest electrical needs. Wolf prints crossed the clearing in a straight line, leading from the forest edge to within 30 feet of the cabin's front porch before veering toward the creek. The tracks were large, suggesting mature animals, and fresh enough that snow hadn't yet obscured their sharp edges. Following the trail, Marcus found where the pack had stopped at the creek to drink. The snow around the water's edge was trampled by multiple animals, and he counted at least 6 distinct sets of prints. But it was what he found 50 yards downstream that made his pulse quicken. At the base of a massive pine tree, someone had left an offering. The deer haunch was frozen solid, expertly butchered and positioned with deliberate care on a flat boulder. No scavenger had touched it, suggesting it had been placed recently. But what struck Marcus as most significant was the location, directly beside one of his grandfather's old observation blinds, a carefully camouflaged shelter that provided an unobstructed view of a meadow where deer commonly grazed. Marcus approached the meat cautiously, scanning the surrounding forest for any sign of movement. The placement was too deliberate to be coincidental, and too respectful to be threatening. Someone had left food for the wolves at a spot where his grandfather used to watch them. Almost as if maintaining a tradition the old man had established, he retreated to the cabin to fetch his grandfather's binoculars and camera, then returned to the observation blind. The structure was larger than it had appeared from a distance, built from intricately woven branches and designed to blend seamlessly with the forest floor. Inside, he found a wooden bench worn smooth by decades of use. Along with a logbook protected by a waterproof case, the entries in the logbook were recent. The most current dated just 4 days earlier. But the handwriting wasn't his grandfather's. These notes were penned in a graceful script that suggested a woman's hand, documenting wolf behavior with the same meticulous attention to detail that had characterized Thomas's journals. December 18th. The new alpha female is pregnant again. Third litter since taking over the pack leadership 2 years ago. She's choosing denning sites along the eastern ridge, probably because of the thermal springs that keep that area warmer. The pack has grown to 11 adults plus juveniles from last season. Prey is abundant this winter, so territorial disputes with the neighboring pack have been minimal. Marcus flipped through the entries, finding observations that went back 6 months. Whoever was writing these notes possessed an intimate knowledge of the local wolf population that rivaled his grandfather's expertise. The observer tracked individual animals by name, documented their relationships and hierarchies, and recorded behavioral patterns with scientific precision. November 3rd, Storm followed the pack to high ground today. She's teaching the young ones to hunt elk, using the same techniques grandfather showed her mother years ago. The continuity is remarkable, knowledge passed down through generations, adapted but essentially unchanged. She remembers the places where humans can be trusted. The name Storm appeared frequently in the entries, always in the context of a female wolf who seemed to serve as both hunter and teacher for the pack. The notes described her as unusually large for a female, with distinctive silver markings, and an intelligence that bordered on uncanny. But it was the references to grandfather that made Marcus's hands tremble as he read. October 21st, found Storm at grandfather's grave again. She brings the others there sometimes, as if she's telling them stories about the old man who lived among them. I think she misses him the way I do. Loss creates its own language, and she speaks it fluently. Someone had been visiting his grandfather's grave, someone who had known the old man well enough to be mourned by the wolves he'd befriended. Marcus felt a chill that had nothing to do with the December cold, as he realized he might not be alone in these mountains. He spent the rest of the day at the blind, watching the deer haunch and hoping to catch sight of whoever was maintaining this vigil. The afternoon passed without incident, but as dusk approached, movement at the forest edge caught his attention. A figure emerged from the tree line with the fluid grace of someone completely at home in the wilderness. Even at a distance, Marcus could see it was a woman. She moved with purposeful confidence across the snowy meadow, approaching the offering without the cautious scanning that marked inexperienced hikers. Her clothing was practical rather than fashionable, heavy wool coat, sturdy boots, and a knit cap that couldn't quite contain the auburn hair that caught the last rays of sunlight. She knelt beside the boulder and examined the untouched deer haunch, then looked directly toward the blind where Marcus sat hidden. For a moment, he wondered if she had somehow detected his presence, but her gaze moved on without pausing. She stood and walked to the creek, where she filled a metal water bottle and performed what appeared to be a ritual washing of her hands. In the icy stream, that's when the wolves appeared. They materialized from the forest shadows like smoke given form. 5 adult animals moving in the synchronized silence that marked experienced pack hunters. Marcus held his breath, expecting the woman to flee or at least show some sign of alarm. Instead, she remained calmly by the creek, not even turning as the largest wolf approached to within arm's reach. The interaction that followed challenged everything Marcus thought he knew about wolf behavior. The alpha female, clearly the Storm mentioned in the logbook, approached the woman with the easy familiarity of a domestic dog greeting its owner. But there was nothing domesticated about this magnificent creature. She stood nearly 3 feet at the shoulder, her silver-gray coat shimmering with health and power, yellow eyes holding an intelligence that seemed almost human. The woman extended her hand, palm down, and Storm sniffed it briefly before bumping her massive head against the woman's shoulder in what appeared to be genuine affection. The other pack members arranged themselves in a loose circle, alert but relaxed, while Storm and the woman engaged in what could only be described as a conversation. The woman spoke in low tones, her words carrying across the still air, but too soft for Marcus to understand. Storm responded with subtle body language, ear positions, tail movements, gentle vocalizations that sounded more like speech than typical wolf communication. The exchange continued for several minutes, with other pack members occasionally adding their own comments through positioning changes or quiet whines. When the conversation ended, the woman stood and walked back toward the boulder where the deer haunch waited. She lifted the frozen meat easily, carrying it to a spot 20 yards away where she placed it on bare ground. Then she stepped back and waited. Storm approached the offering, sniffed it thoroughly, and then looked back at the woman. Some signal passed between them, because the entire pack suddenly converged on the meat. But their feeding was remarkably civilized, no snapping or competition, just efficient sharing that ensured every animal received its portion. While the wolves fed, the woman walked to the exact spot where Marcus's grandfather's observation blind was hidden. She stopped directly in front of his hiding place and spoke in a voice loud enough for him to hear clearly. "You've been reading grandfather's journals." It wasn't a question. Marcus felt his heart hammering against his ribs as he realized his presence had been known all along. He remained motionless, hoping distance and camouflage might still preserve his concealment. "The cabin's been lived in for 3 weeks," she continued, addressing the forest in general but clearly speaking to him. "Wood smoke, changed light patterns, tracks around the solar panels. You're his grandson, Marcus." The use of his name sent a shock through his system. This stranger knew who he was, had apparently been monitoring his presence since his arrival. He felt exposed and vulnerable in a way that had nothing to do with physical danger. "You can stay hidden if you prefer," the woman said, turning her attention back to the feeding wolves. "But Storm wants to meet you. She remembers your grandfather with great fondness, and she's curious about his family." As if responding to her name, the massive alpha female looked up from the deer haunch and fixed her golden gaze directly on the blind. Marcus felt the weight of that stare like a physical presence. There was no aggression in those eyes, but there was an assessment taking place that seemed to penetrate straight through his carefully constructed defenses. The woman followed Storm's gaze and spoke again, her voice carrying a warmth that seemed at odds with the surreal nature of the situation. "Grandfather wrote about you, in his later journals. He hoped you might find your way here eventually." That revelation broke through Marcus's paralysis. His grandfather had known about his troubles, had somehow anticipated that his damaged grandson might need the sanctuary he'd created in these mountains. The knowledge that Thomas had thought of him, had prepared for his arrival, brought tears to his eyes that had nothing to do with the cold. Slowly, Marcus pushed aside the woven branches that concealed the blind's entrance and stepped into the open. The woman turned to face him, and he got his first clear look at someone who would change his understanding of what it meant to be human. She appeared to be in her early 30s, with high cheekbones and green eyes that held the same wild intelligence he'd observed in Storm's gaze. Her skin was weathered by sun and wind, but there was a vitality about her that spoke of someone completely at home in her own body. Most remarkably, she showed no fear or surprise at his appearance, as if she'd been expecting him to emerge at exactly this moment. "Hello, Marcus," she said simply. "I'm Rachel Morrison. I've been waiting to meet you." The wolves had finished feeding and now arranged themselves in a loose semicircle behind Rachel, their attention focused on Marcus with the keen interest of creatures evaluating a potential threat or ally. Storm stepped forward until she was directly beside Rachel, close enough that the woman could rest her hand on the wolf's massive shoulder. "Storm would like to know if you're planning to stay," Rachel said, interpreting the alpha's steady gaze with apparent ease. "She's protective of this territory, but she also honors the friendship she had with your grandfather. You're welcome here. Depends on whether you understand the difference between being a guest and being an intruder." Marcus found his voice with difficulty. "I don't understand what's happening here." Rachel smiled, and the expression transformed her entire face, revealing a warmth and humor that made her seem suddenly approachable despite the extraordinary circumstances. "You're about to learn something your grandfather discovered 40 years ago," she said. "Love isn't something humans invented. We just gave it a name and convinced ourselves we owned it. But the wolves knew about love long before we did, and they're much better teachers than we are." Storm made a sound that wasn't quite a growl, wasn't quite a whine, but seemed to carry the weight of complex meaning. Rachel nodded as if she'd understood perfectly. "She says you smell like grandfather did when he first arrived," Rachel translated. "Angry, scared, and carrying pain you don't know how to set down. But she also says you have his hands. The hands of someone who builds rather than destroys." Marcus looked down at his own hands, scarred by years of construction work and calloused from his recent repairs around the cabin. How can she possibly know that? "Wolves read scent the way humans read facial expressions," Rachel explained. "Your emotional state, your recent activities, your health, your intentions. It's all written in molecules they can interpret with remarkable accuracy. Storm knows you've been working with wood, that you've been reading grandfather's journals, and that you haven't touched alcohol in 3 weeks." The last observation hit Marcus like a physical blow. His sobriety was so recent, so fragile, that he'd barely acknowledged it himself. The fact that these creatures could detect something he was still struggling to accept made him feel transparent in a way that was both terrifying and oddly liberating. "Why are you here?" he asked Rachel, gesturing toward the wolves who continued to watch him with patient intensity. "How do you know about my grandfather? About me?" Rachel's expression grew serious. "That's a longer story than we have time for tonight. But the short version is that your grandfather saved my life when I was 16, and the wolves taught me how to live it. I've been the caretaker of this relationship since grandfather passed, making sure the pack remains protected and the bond he created doesn't die with him." She paused, studying Marcus's face in the gathering twilight. "The question now is whether you're ready to learn what he learned. Whether you can let go of the human idea that love requires ownership and control, and discover what wild love actually means." Storm made another vocalization, this one clearly directed at Marcus. The sound carried an unmistakable invitation, a challenge that resonated in his chest like a tuning fork struck against stone. "She's asking if you're brave enough to trust something that could kill you," Rachel said softly. "Because that's where love begins, not with safety, but with the choice to be vulnerable in the presence of power." As if to emphasize the point, Storm took 3 steps closer to Marcus, closing the distance until her breath formed clouds that mingled with his own. She was close enough now that he could see the individual guard hairs in her thick coat, could smell the wild scent of pine and snow and something indefinably predatory. Her yellow eyes held his without blinking, and Marcus felt as if he was being evaluated by an intelligence far older and wiser than his own. The moment stretched between them, pregnant with possibility and danger. Marcus realized that his next choice would determine not just his relationship with these extraordinary creatures, but his entire future in the mountains that his grandfather had loved enough to call home for 40 years. Behind Storm, the rest of the pack waited in perfect stillness, as if they understood that something significant was being decided. And beside her, Rachel watched with eyes that seemed to see straight through to the core of who Marcus was and who he might become. The mountain held its breath, and Marcus Blackwood stood at the threshold of a transformation he couldn't yet imagine. Marcus stood frozen as Storm's massive form closed the final distance between them. The wolf's shoulder reached his waist, and her head, level with his chest, tilted slightly as she studied his face with an intensity that made him feel as if she was reading his soul. Her breath, warm against the December air, carried scents of the deep forest, pine needles, creek water, and something primal that spoke of successful hunts and uncompromising survival. "Don't move," Rachel said quietly. "Let her decide." The advice proved unnecessary. Marcus found himself incapable of movement, mesmerized by the intelligence behind those golden eyes. Storm circled him slowly, her massive paws silent on the snow-covered ground. She sniffed at his jacket, his boots, the pack slung over his shoulder. When she reached his left hand, she paused for a long moment, her nostrils flaring as she processed information Marcus couldn't begin to understand. Then, with deliberate gentleness, Storm pressed her massive head against his palm. The contact sent an electric shock through Marcus's entire nervous system. The wolf's fur was coarser than he'd expected, but beneath it he could feel the warmth of her skin, the steady rhythm of her pulse. Most remarkably, he sensed what could only be described as recognition. Storm wasn't just accepting his presence. She was acknowledging something familiar in him, some echo of his grandfather that lived in his scent or his energy. "She remembers," Rachel said softly. "The genetic markers you share with grandfather. The wolves have long memories for kindness, and they pass those memories to their young through scent recognition and behavioral teaching." Storm stepped back and made a sound that was neither howl nor growl, but something entirely new to Marcus's ears. The other pack members responded immediately, rising from their relaxed positions and forming a loose circle around the three humans. But there was no aggression in their formation. Instead, Marcus sensed he was being formally introduced to the family. "What happens now?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Rachel smiled. "Now you choose. You can go back to the cabin tonight and continue living as a visitor in this territory, or you can begin learning what grandfather learned. But I should warn you, once you start down this path, you can't go back to seeing the world the way you did before." Marcus looked around at the wolves surrounding him, then back at Rachel's expectant face. "What exactly are you offering to teach me?" "How to live without the fear that's been driving you your entire life," she replied. "How to find the kind of love that doesn't demand anything in return but gives everything anyway. How to be human in the way your grandfather learned to be." Human. The words hit Marcus with unexpected force. For months, he'd been running from the wreckage of his life, convinced that his failures had marked him as permanently broken. The idea that there might be a different way of being, one that didn't require him to constantly prove his worth or defend against attack, felt both impossible and desperately necessary. "How did my grandfather find you?" he asked. Rachel's expression grew distant. "He didn't find me. The wolves did. When I was 16, I was running away from a foster home in Kalispell. Third family in 2 years, and this one had a father who thought teenage girls were fair game. I stole some camping gear and headed into the mountains, figuring I'd rather die free than live trapped." She gestured toward the dark forest around them. "I made it about 4 days before hypothermia started setting in. Collapsed in a snowbank about 2 miles from here, completely out of food and too weak to build a proper shelter. I was ready to give up when Storm's grandmother found me." Marcus tried to process what she was telling him. "The wolves found you?" The old alpha female was hunting alone that morning. "She could have ignored me. Should have ignored me according to everything scientists think they know about wolf behavior. Instead, she went back to the pack and brought them to where I was dying. They surrounded me, sharing their body heat, and then one of the young males ran to grandfather's cabin and wouldn't stop howling until he followed. Rachel's voice took on a reverence that made Marcus understand this wasn't just a story. It was the founding myth of her entire life. Grandfather found me unconscious in the middle of a wolf pack that was keeping me alive. He carried me back to the cabin, nursed me through 3 days of fever, and when I was strong enough to listen, he told me something that changed everything. What did he say? That the wolves had chosen me for something, and it was my responsibility to figure out what that something was. He offered to teach me what he'd learned about living with them, but only if I was willing to give up everything I thought I knew about the relationship between humans and the natural world. Storm made another vocalization, this one clearly directed at Rachel. The woman nodded and looked back at Marcus. She's reminding me that you haven't answered my question. Are you ready to learn? Marcus felt the weight of the moment pressing down on him like the Montana sky. Everything in his upbringing, his education, his experience of the world told him that what he was witnessing was impossible. Wolves didn't befriend humans. People didn't communicate with apex predators. And broken men like him didn't get offered second chances by mystical creatures in the wilderness. But his grandfather's journals had documented 40 years of just such impossibilities. And Rachel stood before him as living proof that the conventional wisdom about human-animal relationships was catastrophically incomplete. What would learning involve? He asked. First, you'd have to stay through the winter. The pack doesn't trust seasonal visitors. If you want to be accepted, you need to prove you're committed to being here when survival gets difficult. Second, you'd have to give up the cabin. Marcus felt his stomach drop. Give it up? Rachel shook her head. Not abandon it. But you can't learn to think like a wolf while living like a human. Grandfather spent his first year with the pack sleeping in caves, hunting with them, following their migration patterns. You'd need to do the same. The prospect terrified him. The cabin had become his sanctuary, the first place in years where he'd felt even marginally safe. The idea of leaving that security to live in the wilderness with predators challenged every survival instinct he possessed. And if I say no, then you go back to the cabin tonight, and tomorrow I start the process of relocating the pack to deeper wilderness. Human presence without integration always leads to conflict eventually. The wolves can't afford to have someone in their territory who might bring others, hunters, researchers. Grandfather was protected by his isolation and his relationship with them. You'd need the same protection, or you'd need to leave. It was an ultimatum delivered without malice, but with the absolute finality of natural law. Marcus realized that his choice wasn't just about learning from the wolves. It was about whether he wanted to continue existing as he had been, running from his problems and hiding from genuine connection, or whether he was brave enough to attempt a fundamental transformation. Storm seemed to sense his internal struggle. She approached him again, this time moving to his side and pressing her substantial weight against his leg. The gesture felt like both comfort and encouragement, as if she was offering her support while he wrestled with the most important decision of his life. How long do I have to decide? He asked. Until dawn, Rachel replied. The pack is moving to winter territory tomorrow. If you're coming with us, you'll need to be ready to travel light and far. The practicality of the deadline forced Marcus to consider the logistics of what Rachel was proposing. What about food, shelter? I'm not exactly equipped for wilderness survival. Grandfather's workshop has everything you'd need. Sleeping bag rated for sub-zero temperatures, snowshoes, basic tools, emergency supplies. And the wolves will teach you the rest. How to read weather patterns, how to find water under ice, how to move through forest without leaving tracks that could draw unwanted attention. She paused, studying his expression with the same intensity Storm had shown. But the real question isn't whether you can survive physically. It's whether you can survive the psychological transformation. Living with the pack means giving up human concepts of privacy, control, and individual ownership. It means accepting that your survival depends on the group, and the group's survival depends on your willingness to put their needs before your own desires. Marcus thought about his marriage to Sarah, how it had failed partly because he'd never been able to fully trust her judgment or accept help when he needed it most. His gambling addiction had been, at its core, an attempt to maintain the illusion of control over outcomes he couldn't actually influence. The idea of surrendering that illusion completely was both terrifying and oddly appealing. "What happened to you?" he asked Rachel. "After you learned to live with them?" Her expression softened. "I became who I was always meant to be." The foster system had taught me that love was conditional, that I had to earn it through good behavior or lose it through making mistakes. The wolves taught me that love is simply what you do when you recognize family. No conditions, no transactions, just absolute commitment to each other's well-being. She gestured toward the pack members who continued to watch their conversation with patient attention. These wolves would die for each other without hesitation, not because they've been trained to or because they expect something in return, but because that's what love looks like when it's not corrupted by fear and ownership. Grandfather learned that from them, and it healed something in him that 40 years of human therapy couldn't touch. Marcus felt something stirring in his chest, a longing so deep and primal that it made his throat tight. He'd spent his entire adult life chasing the kind of connection Rachel was describing, through marriage, through gambling highs, through alcohol's false promise of emotional numbness. But he'd always approached it from a place of desperation, trying to fill a void rather than offering something genuine to others. "And you've been living with them ever since?" "Not constantly. I have a small cabin about 10 miles north of here, and I maintain enough connection to the outside world to handle grandfather's business affairs and manage his legacy. But my real life, my real family, is here." She reached out and stroked Storm's massive head with obvious affection. "They raised me from adolescence to adulthood, taught me everything important I know about loyalty, courage, and unconditional love." As if responding to her touch, Storm made a sound that was unmistakably content. The other wolves relaxed their formal positions, several of them settling into comfortable lying positions while maintaining their watchful attention on Marcus. "They're waiting for your decision," Rachel observed. "Wolves don't have patience for human equivocation. They need to know whether you're pack or whether you're not." The pressure of the moment forced Marcus to confront the real question underlying Rachel's offer. Was he willing to risk everything he thought he knew about himself and the world for the possibility of a transformation he couldn't guarantee would work? Was he brave enough to trade the familiar misery of his current existence for an unknown future that might heal him or might leave him even more broken than before? He thought about his grandfather's peaceful death, surrounded by the journals documenting 40 years of profound contentment in these mountains. He thought about the carved wooden bird the old man had left behind, worn smooth by decades of handling by hands that had found meaningful work to do. He thought about the photograph showing Thomas sitting calmly among creatures that should have been his enemies, radiating a serenity that Marcus had never seen in any human face. "If I do this," he said slowly, "and it doesn't work out, what?" "Then," Rachel's smile was gentle but honest, "then you'll probably die. Not because the wolves will hurt you, but because humans who can't adapt to pack life don't survive long in the wilderness. The mountains don't offer participation trophies, Marcus. Either you learn to belong here, or you don't." The brutal honesty was somehow more reassuring than false encouragement would have been. Rachel wasn't trying to sell him on an easy solution to his problems. She was offering him the chance to attempt something genuinely difficult, something that would require him to become a fundamentally different person than he'd been when he arrived at the cabin 3 weeks ago. Storm made another vocalization, this one carrying a note of urgency. Rachel nodded and looked toward the darkening sky. The pack needs to return to their den site before full dark. You have until sunrise to make your choice. If you decide to come with us, pack only what you can carry in a single bag, dress for extended exposure to severe cold, and meet us at the granite outcropping above grandfather's grave. She turned to go, then paused. And Marcus? Whatever you decide, Storm wants you to know that your grandfather would be proud that you made it this far. He wrote in his final journals that he hoped someone from his family would find this place and understand why he chose to stay. The fact that you're even considering this choice means you carry something of his spirit. With that, Rachel whistled softly, and the entire pack rose as one. They moved toward the forest edge with the fluid coordination of a military unit, but Storm lingered for a moment beside Marcus. She looked up at him with those remarkable golden eyes and made a sound that was almost conversational, as if she was offering her own encouragement for the decision ahead. Then she bounded after her pack, disappearing into the forest shadows, with such complete silence that Marcus wondered if the entire encounter had been an elaborate hallucination, brought on by altitude and isolation. But the trampled snow where the wolves had been was real, as were the emotions churning in his chest. As he walked back toward the cabin through the gathering darkness, for the first time since his life had collapsed, Marcus Blackwood faced a choice that wasn't about running away from something, but about running toward a possibility he'd never imagined could exist. The night ahead would be the longest of his life, and by dawn, he would either begin the most important journey he'd ever attempted, or resign himself to a safe, small existence that would slowly kill everything wild and beautiful left in his spirit. Dot in the distance, a wolf howled once, the sound carrying across the valley like a question mark, written against the star-filled sky, the decision that would reshape Elena Vasquez's understanding of reality couldn't wait for dawn. As she stood on the lighthouse's observation deck, watching the ethereal figures of the watchers fade into the pre-dawn mist, she felt the weight of centuries pressing against her consciousness. The ancient beings had offered her something unprecedented, the chance to become humanity's bridge between the physical world and the realm that existed just beyond human perception. Dr. Meridian's weathered hand rested on her shoulder, his presence both comforting and unsettling. In the 3 hours since she discovered his impossible existence, a man who should have died in 1847, but remained vibrantly alive through some cosmic arrangement with forces beyond mortal understanding, Elena had been forced to reconsider everything she believed about life, death, and the nature of consciousness itself. "The choice isn't just about you," Meridian said softly, his voice carrying the accumulated wisdom of nearly 2 centuries. "Every guardian who has stood at this threshold has understood that accepting the role means sacrificing the comfort of ignorance for the burden of truth. But it also means gaining access to knowledge that could fundamentally alter humanity's relationship with the universe." Elena studied the leather-bound journal in her hands, its pages filled with observations that defied conventional physics. Temperature readings that showed localized areas dropping 40 degrees below freezing while maintaining normal atmospheric pressure. Electromagnetic measurements that indicated the presence of energy sources that seemed to draw power from dimensions science hadn't yet discovered. Photographic evidence of phenomena that appeared solid to the naked eye, but registered as empty space on conventional recording equipment. How many others have there been? She asked, thinking of the portrait gallery she discovered in the lighthouses. Upper chambers. Faces spanning nearly 2 centuries, each bearing the same expression of profound understanding mixed with an unmistakable sadness. 17, including myself, Meridian replied. Each chosen by the Watchers for specific qualities they needed during particular periods of human development. The first guardian was selected during the Industrial Revolution, when humanity's relationship with the natural world began changing in ways that concerned beings who had observed our species since its emergence. He gestured toward the horizon, where the first pale light of morning was beginning to reveal the rocky coastline that had witnessed so many impossible encounters. The Watchers aren't malevolent, but they're not benevolent in any way humans would recognize. They exist on a timescale that makes our entire civilization seem like a brief experiment. Their interest in us is partially scientific curiosity and partially ... quality control. The phrase sent a chill through Elena that had nothing to do with the ocean wind. Quality control? They've observed the rise and fall of intelligent species throughout the galaxy. Most follow predictable patterns: rapid technological advancement, followed by environmental destruction, social collapse, or self-annihilation through warfare. Earth represents something unusual in their experience because humans have demonstrated both remarkable creativity and devastating destructiveness in roughly equal measure. Meridian led her to the lighthouse's powerful lamp, its lens array designed to project beams visible for miles across the ocean. But Elena now understood that its true purpose had nothing to do with maritime navigation. The complex crystalline structures embedded within the traditional lighthouse apparatus were clearly not of human manufacture, their surfaces reflecting light in patterns that seemed to extend into spectrums beyond normal human vision. The lighthouse serves as a monitoring station, he explained. Every Guardian has contributed to a vast database of human behavioral observations, technological developments, and social evolution. The Watchers use this information to determine whether our species represents a positive addition to the galactic community or a potential threat that needs to be ... managed. Elena felt her scientific training warring with the fantastic nature of what she was learning. Managed how? Previous civilizations that failed their evaluation period were subjected to intervention. Sometimes this meant technological setbacks that forced societies to develop more sustainable practices. Sometimes it meant the introduction of factors that reduced population density in extreme cases. He didn't need to finish the sentence. Elena's imagination filled in the implications with horrifying clarity. She thought about historical events that had always puzzled researchers: the sudden collapse of advanced civilizations, mysterious plagues that appeared without biological explanation, technological innovations that seemed to vanish from the historical record as quickly as they appeared. But you're telling me that humanity is still under evaluation? That we haven't been judged yet? Earth received a provisional status 75 years ago, largely due to evidence that humans were capable of unprecedented cooperation during global crises. The Watchers observed how our species responded to the Second World War, particularly the scientific collaboration that led to both devastating weapons and life-saving medical advances. They decided to extend our observation period. Meridian walked to a cabinet Elena hadn't noticed before, its contents hidden behind glass panels that seemed to shift and waver when viewed directly. Inside were artifacts that made her breath catch, crystalline devices that pulsed with internal light, metallic objects that appeared to be solid but cast no shadows, and what looked like books written in symbols that seemed to move across the pages as she watched. Every Guardian has been given access to knowledge that's normally restricted to species that have achieved what the Watchers call cosmic citizenship, technologies that could solve every environmental crisis facing our planet, medical understanding that could eliminate most diseases and extend human lifespan indefinitely, scientific principles that would make interstellar travel not just possible, but practical. Elena's mind reeled at the implications, and this knowledge has just been sitting here, while people suffer and die from problems that could apparently be solved. Each Guardian faces the same dilemma you're confronting now. The Watcher's condition for sharing this knowledge is that it can only be released gradually, in ways that don't destabilize human society or accelerate our development beyond our emotional and ethical maturity. They've seen what happens when advanced technology is given to species that haven't developed the wisdom to use it responsibly. The weight of the decision pressed down on Elena like a physical force. She understood now why every guardian in the portrait gallery bore that expression of profound sadness. They had been given the power to help humanity transcend its limitations, but only within constraints that made meaningful change agonizingly slow. What happened to the others? She asked. The guardians who came before you. Meridian's expression grew distant. Some completed their terms and chose to return to normal human life, though they were required to have their memories of the guardianship modified to prevent them from sharing what they'd learned. Others requested to remain in extended service, like myself. A few. He paused, and Elena sensed there was a darker aspect to the guardianship that he was reluctant to discuss. A few broke under the psychological pressure, having access to solutions for humanity's greatest problems while being forbidden from implementing them, rapidly drove them to increasingly desperate actions. They attempted to release information prematurely or tried to force technological developments before human society was ready. The Watchers had to intervene. What kind of intervention? The knowledge was taken from them, along with most of their memories of their human lives. They exist now in a state similar to mine, but without the consolation of purpose. They're observers who remember just enough to understand what they've lost, but not enough to find peace with their choice. Elena thought about Dr. Sarah Chun, the marine biologist whose research had brought her to this lighthouse. Chun had been investigating reports of unusual deep-sea phenomena, acoustic signatures that suggested the presence of large structures on the ocean floor that didn't appear on any geological surveys. Now Elena wondered whether her colleague had been unconsciously drawn to this place by forces beyond her understanding. The Watchers have been particularly interested in humanities. Recent technological developments, Meridian continued. Artificial intelligence, genetic engineering, quantum computing. These represent potential inflection points that could accelerate our development beyond our current ethical framework. They need a guardian who understands both the scientific principles involved and the social implications of rapid technological change. Elena realized why she had been chosen. Her background in marine biology had led to research in biomimetic technology, studying how ocean creatures had evolved solutions to complex engineering problems and applying those insights to human innovations. Her work bridged the gap between natural systems and technological applications, exactly the kind of integrative thinking the Watchers would value. What would my actual responsibilities involve? She asked, though part of her already knew the answer would commit her to a path that would fundamentally alter her relationship with humanity. Observation and documentation, primarily. You would continue your scientific career, but with access to knowledge and perspectives that would guide your research in directions beneficial to long-term human development. You would identify promising technologies and find ways to introduce them gradually, disguised as natural scientific discoveries. Meridian gestured toward the complex array of instruments that filled the lighthouse's upper chamber. You would also monitor global events and provide the Watchers with detailed analyses of humanity's social and psychological evolution. Your reports would contribute to their ongoing evaluation of our species' readiness for full cosmic citizenship. And the price? Isolation from normal human emotional connections. The knowledge burden becomes heavier with each passing year, and the gulf between what you know and what others can understand grows increasingly difficult to bridge. Most guardians find that maintaining close relationships becomes psychologically impossible. Elena thought about her sister Maria, about her parents in San Diego who had sacrificed so much to support her education, about the colleagues who had become genuine friends through years of shared research and discovery. The idea of losing those connections felt like a death sentence, even if it was imposed in service of humanity's greater good. There's something else, Meridian said quietly. Something I haven't told you about the current situation. Elena felt her stomach tighten. The revelations of the past few hours had already challenged her understanding of reality beyond anything she could have imagined. But Meridian's tone suggested that the most difficult truths were yet to come. Humanity's evaluation period is coming to an end. The Watchers have determined that our species is approaching several critical thresholds simultaneously: climate change, artificial intelligence development, and space exploration capabilities. They need to make a final determination about our cosmic citizenship status within the next decade. The implications hit Elena like a physical blow. You're saying that human civilization is essentially on trial, and the verdict will be delivered soon regardless of what we do. The preliminary indicators are concerning: rising global tensions, environmental degradation accelerating faster than mitigation efforts, technological developments that prioritize short-term profit over long-term sustainability. The Watchers have observed similar patterns in 17 other civilizations over the past million years. 16 of those civilizations failed their evaluation. Elena's scientific mind automatically focused on the statistical reality of what Meridian was telling her. What happened to the one that passed? They achieved what the Watchers term sustainable transcendence, technological advancement, coupled with environmental harmony and social cooperation that made them valuable contributors to the galactic community. They were granted access to a network of civilizations that spans multiple star systems and shares knowledge and resources across vast distances. The vision of humanity joining an interstellar community of advanced civilizations was breathtaking, but Elena understood that it came with the sobering knowledge that failure meant something far worse than simply continuing as they were. And if we fail? Meridian was quiet for a long moment, his gaze fixed on the horizon where the sun was now fully visible above the ocean's surface. The Watchers don't destroy failed civilizations directly. They simply withdraw their protection and allow natural consequences to proceed unimpeded. Protection from what? There are forces in the galaxy that view emerging civilizations as either resources to be exploited or threats to be eliminated. The Watchers' monitoring network has been shielding Earth from those forces while our evaluation period continues. If we fail, that protection ends. Elena felt the full weight of cosmic responsibility settling on her shoulders. The choice she faced wasn't just about her personal future, or even about contributing to humanity's scientific advancement. It was about potentially influencing the survival of the entire human species during the most critical period in its history. How much influence would I actually have? She asked. If the evaluation is based on global human behavior, what difference could one guardian make? More than you might think. Previous guardians have been responsible for some of humanity's most significant positive developments: medical breakthroughs that prevented pandemic disasters, environmental technologies that bought us crucial time to address climate change, communication innovations that enabled unprecedented global cooperation during crises. Meridian opened one of the glass cases and removed a device that looked like a crystalline sphere suspended within a lattice of metallic threads. As he held it, the sphere began to emit a soft, pulsing light that seemed to resonate with something deep in Elena's consciousness. This is a knowledge interface. It would allow you to access the accumulated scientific understanding of multiple galactic civilizations, but only in ways that could be presented as natural human discoveries. The technologies you would be able to introduce gradually could give humanity the tools it needs to pass its evaluation. Elena stared at the device, understanding that touching it would represent a point of no return. The sphere seemed to pulse in rhythm with her heartbeat, and she had the unsettling sensation that it was already beginning to establish some kind of connection with her neural patterns. What about my current life? My research, my colleagues? My family? You would maintain your external life, but you would be fundamentally changed. The knowledge burden would alter your perspective on human relationships and achievements in ways That would make normal emotional connections increasingly difficult to sustain. Most guardians find themselves becoming progressively more isolated as the years pass. Elena thought about Dr. Chun, who had always seemed slightly apart from their research team despite her obvious dedication and competence. She wondered now whether Chun had been approached by the Watchers and declined, leaving her with fragmentary memories that drew her to investigate phenomena she couldn't quite understand. "Have you been happy?" she asked Meridian directly. His smile was sad but genuine. Happiness becomes a different concept when you understand the cosmic context of human existence. "I've found deep satisfaction in knowing that my observations and reports have contributed to humanity's continued survival. But I've also experienced a loneliness that no ordinary human could comprehend." As if summoned by their conversation, movement at the edge of Elena's vision drew her attention to the lighthouse's exterior observation platform. The Watchers had returned, their translucent forms more solid in the morning light, but still clearly not bound by the same physical laws that governed normal matter. Their leader, the being who had first spoken to Elena through means that bypassed her auditory system entirely, approached the lighthouse's entrance. As it drew near, Elena felt the familiar sensation of thoughts and concepts being inserted directly into her consciousness, but this time the communication was more complex and layered with emotional undertones she hadn't experienced before. Time convergence approaches. Choice moment cannot extend beyond the current solar cycle. Human development trajectory requires intervention guidance or protection withdrawal becomes necessary. Guardian selection represents the final opportunity for positive outcome modification. Elena understood that the Watcher was telling her that humanity's evaluation period was entering its final phase, and that her decision about accepting the guardianship role would directly influence whether the human species received the help it needed to pass its cosmic citizenship test. Previous guardian knowledge sharing demonstrates human potential for positive development. Current guardian selection represents optimal opportunity for evaluation period success. Decline choice results in protection withdrawal. Initiation within stellar cycles numbering less than 10. The message was clear. If Elena refused the guardianship, humanity would face its final evaluation without the subtle guidance that previous guardians had provided, and the Watchers would begin withdrawing their protection within 10 years, regardless of the outcome. Elena looked at Meridian, whose expression reflected both understanding and sympathy for the impossible choice she faced. She thought about her sister's children, who would grow up in a world whose fate might depend on decisions being made in this lighthouse at this moment. She thought about the millions of researchers around the world who dedicated their lives to solving humanity's greatest challenges without knowing that the solutions they needed were stored in crystalline devices just beyond their reach. The weight of cosmic responsibility threatened to overwhelm her, but Elena realized that the real question wasn't whether she was brave enough to accept this burden. The question was whether she was brave enough to refuse it, knowing what her refusal would mean for everyone she loved and everyone they would ever love. The lighthouse being swept across the ocean in its endless rotation, a metaphor for the choice between illumination and darkness that now defined the rest of Elena Vasquez's existence. The future of human civilization balanced on the edge of her decision, and dawn was breaking on the most important day in the history of the species. Elena's hand trembled as she reached toward the crystalline sphere, its pulsing light seeming to synchronize with the rapid beating of her heart. The device felt warm against her palm, and the moment her skin made contact with its surface, the world exploded into sensory overload that transcended anything her human nervous system had been designed to process. Suddenly, she could perceive the electromagnetic spectrum in its entirety, radio waves carrying fragments of conversations from ships hundreds of miles away, infrared signatures revealing the heat patterns of every living creature within a 50-mile radius, ultraviolet patterns dancing across the ocean's surface like a language written in light itself. But more overwhelming than the expanded sensory input was the flood of knowledge that began pouring directly into her. Consciousness. Mathematical equations that describe the fundamental forces governing reality across multiple dimensions. Biological. Principles that explained how consciousness could exist independently of organic neural networks. Technological blueprints for devices that could manipulate matter at the subatomic level with precision that made current. Human engineering seemed like crude stone tools. By comparison, the information came too fast and in too great a volume for her mind to process normally. But somehow Elena found herself understanding concepts that should have required decades of study to comprehend. The crystalline interface was apparently designed to bypass the normal limitations of human cognitive processing, downloading knowledge directly into areas of her brain that had previously remained dormant. Through the overwhelming cascade of alien information, she became aware that Dr. Meridian was supporting her physically, his hands steady on her shoulders as her body struggled to adapt to the neurological changes the device was triggering. His voice seemed to come from very far away, though she knew he was standing directly beside her. "The initial integration is always difficult," he said, his words reaching her through layers of expanded consciousness that made normal human communication seem impossibly limited. "Your brain is forming new neural pathways to accommodate information structures that don't exist in typical human cognition. The process will stabilize, but you need to remain calm and let it happen naturally." Elena tried to respond but found that her vocal cords seemed disconnected from her intentions. Instead, she discovered that she could communicate directly with the crystalline device, her thoughts interfacing with its alien architecture in ways that felt both completely foreign and oddly familiar. Through this new mode of communication, she began to understand that the sphere wasn't just a storage device for information. It was a living entity, a fragment of consciousness from a civilization so advanced that individual beings had transcended the need for physical bodies millions of years ago. Integration proceeding within acceptable parameters. The entity communicated, its thoughts appearing in Elena's mind as concepts rather than words. Human neuroplasticity demonstrates unexpected compatibility with consciousness expansion protocols. Knowledge transfer efficiency, exceeding projections for organic intelligence types. The clinical nature of the communication was somehow reassuring. Elena realized that despite the overwhelming nature of what was happening to her, the process was being carefully monitored and controlled by an intelligence that had guided thousands of similar transformations across the galaxy. She wasn't the first organic being to undergo this kind of enhancement, and the procedures had been refined over eons of experience with various species. As the initial shock of expanded awareness began to subside, Elena started to gain conscious control over her new perceptual abilities. She could focus her attention to filter the sensory input, concentrating on specific aspects of the electromagnetic spectrum or directing her consciousness toward particular types of information within the vast database now accessible to her. Mind. The first thing she chose to examine was Earth's current status in the Watcher's evaluation system. What she discovered made her newly enhanced heart race with alarm that transcended anything she had felt as a purely human consciousness. Humanity's performance metrics were far worse than Meridian had indicated. Climate change acceleration was outpacing even the most pessimistic projections, with feedback loops already triggered that would make stabilization virtually impossible. Without technological intervention beyond current human capabilities, social cohesion indices showed declining cooperation and increasing tribal hostility across all major population centers. Resource depletion calculations indicated that critical shortages of rare Earth elements would cripple technological development within 15 years. Most troubling of all, the Watchers had detected evidence that other galactic civilizations had begun taking notice of Earth's rapid technological advancement. Species that viewed emerging civilizations as potential threats were monitoring human space exploration efforts and military developments with increasing concern. The protection that had shielded Earth from intervention by hostile forces was becoming more difficult to maintain as humanity's electromagnetic signatures became impossible to hide. Current trajectory analysis indicates probability of natural positive outcome at 3.7%, the crystalline entity informed her. Guardian intervention historically improves success probability to an average of 23.4%. Previous Guardians achieved a maximum intervention success rate of 67.8% through optimal technology introduction timing and social influence. Strategies. Elena understood that she was being given access to the complete statistical analysis of humanity's chances for survival. Without intervention, her species was almost certainly doomed to fail its cosmic citizenship evaluation. Even with her help as a Guardian, the odds remained overwhelmingly against successful transcendence to galactic community membership, but 67.8% represented hope, and that hope came with knowledge of exactly which interventions had proven most effective in similar situations throughout galactic history. The crystalline entity began showing her case studies of other civilizations that had faced comparable challenges, along with detailed analyses of the Guardian strategies that had made the difference between extinction and Kofa transcendence. One particularly relevant example involved a species called the Kethmoran, whose homeworld had faced environmental collapse due to industrial poisoning of their atmosphere. Their Guardian had introduced atmospheric processing technologies disguised as natural scientific discoveries, but the real breakthrough had come through social engineering, carefully orchestrated events that convinced the global population to prioritize long-term survival over short-term economic gains. Another case study featured the Vorthek, a highly aggressive species that had developed nuclear weapons before achieving sufficient emotional maturity to use them responsibly. Their Guardian had prevented global warfare by subtly influencing the development of communication technologies that made cultural exchange and empathy easier to achieve on a planetary scale. Elena realized that successful guardianship wasn't just about introducing advanced technologies. It required a deep understanding of human psychology and the ability to manipulate social and cultural development in ways that would encourage the behavioral changes necessary for long-term species survival. Guardian selection. Based on the candidate's demonstrated capacity for systems-level thinking and cross-disciplinary synthesis, the entity explained. Elena Vasquez's background in biomimetic research indicates optimal potential for integrating technological and biological solutions. Previous publications demonstrate understanding of emergent properties in complex systems. Elena found herself reviewing her own scientific work through the lens of cosmic perspective, and she was startled to realize how many of her research insights had applications far beyond what she had originally intended. Her studies of bioluminescent communication in deep-sea creatures could be adapted to create quantum communication networks that would make global cooperation significantly easier to achieve. Her work on photosynthetic efficiency in extremophile organisms contained principles that could revolutionize energy production without requiring technological developments that would seem impossible to current human science. The crystalline entity began showing her how these and dozens of other seemingly academic research projects could be developed into practical applications that would address humanity's most critical challenges. But the timeline for implementation would require careful orchestration to avoid triggering social disruption or technological dependencies that could backfire if not properly managed. Warning: Guardian's psychological adaptation period typically requires 847 to 1,243 Earth days for complete integration, the entity informed her. During the adaptation period, Guardians experience progressive detachment from normal human emotional responses and social connections. Process irreversible once neural pathway modifications exceed 67% completion. Elena felt a chill of understanding. The entity was warning her that accepting the guardianship would gradually but inevitably transform her into something that was no longer quite human. The expanded consciousness and access to cosmic knowledge would change her brain structure in ways that would make it increasingly difficult to relate to people who remained trapped in purely human perspectives. She thought about Dr. Meridian's obvious loneliness, his gentle but unmistakable sadness when he spoke about the isolation that came with cosmic responsibility. Now she understood that his emotional distance wasn't a choice, but an inevitable consequence of the neurological changes required to function as a guardian. Query: Elena Vasquez's acceptance of guardian role confirmed? The entity's question carried an undertone of urgency that suggested the window for decision-making was rapidly closing. Elena could sense that the Watchers were monitoring her integration with the crystalline interface, and that her choice needed to be made before the neural modifications progressed beyond a point of no return. She looked at Dr. Meridian, whose expression reflected both hope and deep sympathy for the impossible position she found herself in. Through her enhanced perceptions, she could see the electromagnetic patterns that surrounded his brain, clear evidence of the extensive neural modifications that had sustained his consciousness for nearly 2 centuries, but had also fundamentally altered the structure of his humanity. "There's something I need to know before I decide," Elena said, surprised to discover that her voice now carried harmonic frequencies that hadn't been present before the integration began. "What happens to my current relationships? My family, my colleagues, the people who depend on me?" Meridian's smile was infinitely sad. "You'll continue to care about them, but the nature of that caring will change. The expanded perspective makes it difficult to maintain the emotional intensity that characterizes normal human relationships. You'll understand their problems and want to help them, but you'll also see their individual concerns in the context of cosmic significance, which diminishes their apparent importance." Elena felt a stab of grief for relationships that weren't yet lost, but would inevitably be transformed beyond recognition. She thought about her sister Maria's excitement about her upcoming wedding, her parents' pride in her scientific achievements, her colleagues' passionate dedication to research projects that would seem almost trivially limited from a cosmic perspective. Alternative option available. The crystalline entity suddenly communicated. Guardian role acceptance with modified parameters. Reduced neural modification extent preserves greater human emotional capacity, but limits knowledge access and intervention capabilities. Elena's enhanced awareness immediately grasped the implications. She could choose a partial guardianship that would allow her to retain more of her human nature while still gaining access to enough alien knowledge to potentially help humanity through its evaluation period. The trade-off would be reduced effectiveness and a higher probability of ultimate failure, but it would preserve the relationships and emotional connections that made life meaningful to her. Modified Guardian. Parameters. Knowledge access limited to 34% of the full database. Neural modification extent limited to 23% of standard protocols. Estimated intervention success probability reduced to 41.2%. Emotional preservation factor maintained at 78% of baseline human parameters. The offer was tempting, but Elena realized that accepting reduced capabilities might condemn humanity to failure while leaving her with enough awareness to understand exactly how her limitations had contributed to her species' doom. The partial guardianship would preserve her human relationships, but burden her with the knowledge that she could have done more to save everyone she loved. Through the lighthouse's windows, she could see the Watchers gathering in greater numbers, their translucent forms creating patterns of movement that her enhanced perception recognized as a complex communication network. They were preparing for her decision, and she sensed that the cosmic machinery involved in humanity's evaluation was poised to shift into different configurations depending on her choice. Final decision point approaching, the entity warned. Neural Modification threshold, 23% completion. Guardian acceptance or rejection must be confirmed within 127 seconds to prevent incomplete integration complications. Elena closed her eyes and reached out with her newly expanded awareness to sense the global patterns of human activity. She could perceive the electromagnetic signatures of major cities, the heat blooms of industrial activity, the radio transmissions that carried fragments of human culture and communication across the planet's surface. Billions of individual lives pursuing their daily routines, unaware that their collective future was being decided in a lighthouse on the edge of the world. She thought about the children in those cities who would grow up in whatever world her decision created. She thought about the scientists and artists and ordinary people who would never know that their chances for a meaningful future had been determined by choices made by someone they would never meet. She thought about the weight of cosmic responsibility and the price of knowledge that transcended human understanding. But mostly, she thought about hope. Decision confirmed. Elena projected to the crystalline entity, her consciousness fully committed to a path that would transform her into something beyond human comprehension. Full Guardian protocols accepted. Begin complete neural modification sequence. The world exploded into patterns of light and knowledge that would reshape not just her own existence, but the trajectory of human civilization itself. In accepting the burden of cosmic consciousness, Elena Vasquez had chosen to sacrifice her humanity to give her species the best possible chance for transcendence. The lighthouse beam swept across the ocean as it had for generations, but now it carried signals that would guide humanity toward a future none of them could yet imagine. Dr. Meridian watched the transformation with tears streaming down his weathered face, knowing that he was witnessing both the birth of Earth's most powerful guardian and the death of Elena Vasquez as she had once been. The real work of saving humanity was about to begin. The neural modification sequence felt like drowning in liquid starlight. Elena's consciousness expanded beyond the confines of her skull, stretching across dimensional barriers that human language had no words to describe. Every cell in her body sang with new frequencies as the crystalline entity rewrote the fundamental architecture of her awareness, installing pathways that would allow her to process information from civilizations that had mastered the cosmos. While Earth was still cooling from its formation, through the overwhelming cascade of transformation, she remained dimly aware of Dr. Meridian's presence beside her, his ancient hands steady on her shoulders as her body convulsed with changes that went far deeper than mere biology. The modifications weren't just neurological, they were quantum mechanical, altering the way her consciousness interfaced with reality itself. Integration proceeding optimally. The crystalline entity reported directly into her expanding awareness. Human neural plasticity exceeding all previous organic species by 347%. Full Guardian capabilities will be available within 6 standard time periods. Elena tried to ask what 6 standard time periods meant in human terms, but discovered that her concept of time was already shifting. She could perceive the rotation of the Earth as a gentle, rhythmic pulse, sense the orbital dance of the solar system as a complex symphony of gravitational harmonics, and detect the subtle electromagnetic fluctuations that marked the passage of cosmic events happening thousands of light years away. When the transformation finally stabilized, Elena found herself looking at the lighthouse through senses that had been fundamentally rewritten. The building's physical structure was only the most superficial layer of what she now perceived. Beneath the stone and metal, she could see energy patterns that revealed the true nature of the facility, a dimensional anchor point that connected Earth to a vast network of monitoring stations scattered across the galaxy. The watchers themselves appeared completely different to her enhanced vision. What had seemed like translucent, ethereal beings were actually complex energy matrices, conscious patterns of organized information that existed independently of physical matter. Their true forms were beautiful beyond human comprehension, geometric, structures of pure thought that pulsed with mathematical harmonies that made her newly expanded consciousness resonate with wonder. Welcome to Cosmic Awareness. Guardian Elena Vasquez, their leader, communicated, the message arriving as a multidimensional data packet that contained not just words but emotional undertones, sensory experiences, and contextual information that would have taken hours to convey through normal human language. Your transformation success exceeds optimal parameters. Intervention capabilities now approaching maximum theoretical efficiency for organic-based consciousness. Dr. Meridian helped her to a chair as her body struggled to adapt to the neurological changes. Though her mind was soaring through expanded dimensions of awareness, her physical form remained fundamentally human and needed time to adjust to its new cognitive load. The first few hours are always the most disorienting, he said, his voice now carrying harmonics that her enhanced hearing could detect but that her original human consciousness would have missed entirely. You're experiencing reality through sensory modalities that don't exist in normal human neurology. It takes time to learn how to filter and focus the input. Elena discovered that she could consciously adjust her perceptual focus, zooming her awareness from quantum-level interactions within individual atoms to planetary-scale patterns of electromagnetic activity. The sensation was intoxicating, like having unlimited zoom capabilities for both a microscope and a telescope, but applied to every aspect of reality simultaneously. First assignment parameters now available for review, the Watcher leader announced. And suddenly Elena's consciousness was flooded with detailed mission specifications that would have taken days to read through normal human text processing. The assignment was more complex and urgent than she had anticipated. A series of seismic events in the Pacific Ring of Fire had been triggered not by natural geological processes, but by the testing activities of a deep-sea mining operation that had unknowingly destabilized a network of underwater volcanic systems. The mining company, based in Japan, was scheduled to begin full-scale extraction operations within 72 hours, operations that would trigger a cascading series of eruptions capable of generating tsunamis that could devastate coastlines. Across the entire Pacific Basin, the potential death toll was staggering. Conservative estimates suggested that the resulting tsunamis could kill over 12 million people and displace another 40 million, creating refugee crises that would destabilize governments across multiple continents. But the true catastrophe would be longer term. The massive volcanic eruptions would inject enough particulate matter into the atmosphere to trigger a global cooling period that could last for decades, devastating agricultural systems and potentially triggering conflicts over increasingly scarce resources. Human governmental and scientific institutions lack sufficient information processing capabilities to prevent this outcome through conventional means, the Watcher explained. Intervention requires Guardian-level technological introduction disguised as natural scientific discovery. Elena found herself automatically accessing vast databases of geological and engineering knowledge that had been accumulated by dozens of galactic civilizations over millions of years. The solution to the deep-sea mining crisis was actually straightforward. A specific pattern of controlled seismic releases that would safely dissipate the accumulated geological stress without triggering catastrophic eruptions. The technology to create these controlled releases already existed within human capabilities, but the precise calculations required to identify optimal intervention points were beyond current Earth-based computing power, unless someone provided the exact coordinates and timing specifications disguised as a breakthrough in seismic modeling. Dr. Meridian was watching her with obvious concern as she processed the mission parameters. The first assignment is always designed to test a Guardian's ability to balance intervention effectiveness with preservation of the illusion that humans are developing solutions independently, he explained. You'll need to find a way to get the critical information to the right researchers without revealing how you obtained knowledge that should be impossible for any human to possess. Elena's enhanced awareness was already analyzing potential intervention strategies. The most efficient approach would be to provide the crucial calculations to Dr. Kenji Tanaka, a seismologist at Tokyo University whose research had brought him closer than any other human scientist to understanding the true scope of the deep-sea mining threat. Tanaka had the professional credentials and institutional connections necessary to get his findings taken seriously by both governmental agencies and the mining corporation responsible for the crisis, but the challenge lay in the delivery method. The calculations were too complex and precise to have been developed through normal human research methods. Elena would need to create a plausible pathway for Tanaka to have discovered the information independently, while ensuring that the solution reached him in time to prevent the catastrophic extraction operations. Recommended Intervention Protocol: Guardian Consciousness Integration with Human Research Networks. The crystalline entity suggested subtle influence on data processing algorithms can guide target researcher toward optimal solution discovery. Without revealing external information sources, the suggestion made, Elena realized that her new capabilities included something she hadn't yet fully grasped: the ability to interface directly with electronic systems and influence their operations through quantum-level manipulation of their processing matrices. She could essentially hack into computer networks not through conventional cybersecurity vulnerabilities, but by directly altering the quantum states of individual electrons within their processing circuits. The ethical implications were staggering. She now possessed the ability to manipulate any electronic system on Earth, from personal computers to military defense networks to global financial institutions. The power was both thrilling and terrifying, representing capabilities that could reshape human civilization overnight if used without the careful restraint that cosmic citizenship required. Every guardian struggles with the temptation to implement rapid, dramatic changes, Dr. Meridian observed, apparently reading her emotional state through subtle cues that her transformation had made visible to his enhanced perception. The knowledge and capabilities you now possess could solve virtually every human problem within a matter of years. But the Watchers have observed that species which advance too rapidly inevitably destroy themselves through technologies they haven't developed the wisdom to control responsibly. Elena understood that her role required her to work within human development timelines, introducing solutions gradually enough that Earth's civilization could adapt to each advancement before moving on to the next level of capability. It was a frustrating constraint, but she could now access the historical records of 17 civilizations that had failed their cosmic citizenship evaluations precisely because they had received technological advancement too rapidly for their social and ethical frameworks to accommodate. Intervention timeline: 23.7 hours remaining before deep-sea extraction operations commence, the Watcher reminded her. Guardian action required within 18.2 hours to ensure sufficient processing time for human decision-making mechanisms. Elena focused her enhanced awareness on the global internet infrastructure, perceiving it as a vast pulsing network of electromagnetic patterns that carried the digital conversations of human civilization. Within that network, she could identify the specific data streams that connected Dr. Tanaka's research systems to seismic monitoring stations throughout the Pacific region. The intervention she planned was elegant in its subtlety. Rather than providing Tanaka with impossible knowledge, she would manipulate the sensitivity settings of seismic monitoring equipment to reveal geological stress patterns that were actually present but normally filtered out as background noise. The enhanced data would naturally lead Tanaka to the correct conclusions about the impending volcanic instability, while the timing of the discovery would seem like fortunate coincidence rather than external intervention. Elena extended her consciousness into the quantum substrate of the monitoring network, feeling her awareness flow through fiber optic cables and satellite Communication links like water finding its way downhill. The sensation was indescribable. She was simultaneously herself and the entire technological infrastructure of human civilization, maintaining individual consciousness while temporarily becoming part of a vast electronic organism. Within minutes, she had located the specific monitoring stations whose data streams fed into Tanaka's research models. With surgical precision, she adjusted the filtering algorithms to allow previously hidden geological signatures to become visible in the collected data. To any human observer, the changes would appear to be routine software updates implementing improved analytical capabilities. Intervention complete. She reported to the watchers, surprised by how natural the communication felt. Target researcher will discover critical data anomalies within 4.3 hours, based on his established work patterns. Probability of successful crisis prevention, 78.4%. Guardian performance evaluation. Optimal efficiency achieved with minimal intervention footprint. The watcher leader responded, and Elena felt a warm pulse of approval that seemed to resonate through every cell of her transformed body. Integration success confirms selection accuracy. Advanced assignment protocols now accessible. As Elena withdrew her consciousness from the global internet infrastructure, she became aware of how the intervention had affected her relationship with normal human existence. The process of merging temporarily with Earth's technological systems had given her a perspective on human society that was both comprehensive and deeply alienating. She could perceive the flow of information, resources, and energy that sustained human civilization, but she could also see how fragile and inefficient most human institutions were compared to the elegant systems developed by more advanced galactic civilizations. Dr. Meridian was studying her with obvious concern. How do you feel about what you just did? Elena considered the question carefully. It was necessary, she said finally, and relatively easy. But I can already sense how this kind of intervention creates distance from normal human concerns. When you can perceive and influence global systems directly, individual human problems start to seem insignificant. Meridian suggested gently, not insignificant, but limited in scope. Like watching children argue about toys when you know there are adult responsibilities they can't yet comprehend. Elena felt a stab of sadness as she realized how much her perspective had already shifted. Is this what you meant about isolation being inevitable? That's the beginning of it, Meridian confirmed. The expanded awareness brings tremendous capabilities, but it also makes it increasingly difficult to relate to people who remain trapped in purely human perspectives. Over time, even your closest relationships will feel like interactions with beloved but cognitively limited children. Elena thought about her sister Maria, probably at that moment excitedly planning wedding details. That would seem trivially unimportant compared to the cosmic responsibilities Elena now carried. The idea that she might eventually view her family with the same benevolent detachment that adults felt toward children's games was heartbreaking. But she could already sense the psychological distance beginning to develop. Next assignment parameters. Loading, the crystalline entity announced, and Elena felt her enhanced awareness expanding to encompass a new set of global challenges that required immediate attention. This time, the crisis was biological rather than geological. A research laboratory in Berlin had accidentally created a modified strain of influenza virus that combined high transmissibility with resistance to all current antiviral medications. The laboratory's containment protocols were adequate for normal research pathogens, but insufficient for the hybrid strain they had unknowingly developed. Statistical models indicated a 67% probability that the modified virus would escape containment within the next 2 weeks, potentially triggering a global pandemic that could kill between 40 and 90 million people. Elena's enhanced consciousness automatically accessed vast databases of biological and medical knowledge accumulated by galactic civilizations that had faced similar challenges. The solution required two parallel interventions. First, subtle modifications to the laboratory's containment systems that would prevent the accidental release. And second, guided development of new antiviral compounds that could neutralize the modified strain before it became a global threat. But this intervention would be significantly more complex than the seismic crisis, requiring Elena to influence both technological systems and human research processes across multiple institutions and countries. The timeline for success was also much tighter. She would need to coordinate changes in laboratory safety protocols, pharmaceutical research priorities, and international health monitoring systems within a matter of days. Guardian capabilities. Assessment. Current intervention complexity approaches maximum recommended levels for recently integrated consciousness, the Watcher warned. Failure probability increases significantly with attempted simultaneous, multi-system manipulation. Elena felt a surge of determination that surprised her with its intensity. The transformation had enhanced not just her capabilities, but also her emotional investment in humanity's survival. She could perceive the statistical reality of the biological threat with crystalline clarity, but she could also feel the weight of individual human lives that would be lost if she failed to act effectively. "I can handle it," she said, addressing both Dr. Meridian and the Watchers simultaneously. "The pandemic prevention protocols are more complex, but the principles are similar to the seismic intervention. And the stakes are too high to accept a conservative approach." Dr. Meridian's expression showed a mixture of pride and worry. "Remember that Guardian burnout is a real risk," he cautioned. "Attempting interventions beyond your current integration level can cause permanent damage to your enhanced consciousness. Better to succeed partially than to fail completely." But Elena was already extending her awareness toward the global network of research institutions and pharmaceutical companies, her consciousness flowing through the electronic infrastructure that connected laboratories across multiple continents. The sensation of being simultaneously present in dozens of locations was intoxicating, like conducting a vast orchestra of human knowledge and capability. The real work of cosmic guardianship was just beginning, and Elena Vasquez was about to discover whether her transformed consciousness was capable of preventing the next catastrophic threat to human civilization. That the future of the species rested in her enhanced hands, and there was no room for failure. Assignment complexity increasing. The Watchers observed as Elena's consciousness expanded across global research networks. Guardian determination levels optimal. Intervention probability calculations adjusting upward. The lighthouse beam continued its eternal rotation, now carrying signals that would help guide humanity through crises they would never know had threatened their existence. Elena's transformation from marine biologist to cosmic guardian was complete, but her education in the true responsibilities of protecting human civilization had only just begun. The next few hours would determine whether Earth's newest guardian possessed the wisdom and capability necessary to preserve her species' chance for transcendence, or whether the weight of cosmic responsibility would prove too great for even her enhanced consciousness to bear. Time was running out, and the stakes had never been higher. The biological crisis proved to be far more intricate than Elena had anticipated. As her enhanced consciousness penetrated the research networks of 17 different laboratories across 4 continents, she discovered that the accidental viral modification in Berlin was not an isolated incident, but part of a cascading series of genetic research accidents that had been occurring with increasing frequency over the past 18 months. Pattern recognition. Algorithms indicate systematic causation rather than random occurrence. The crystalline entity informed her as vast databases of biological research data flooded her expanded awareness. Probability of coincidental timing, 0.0034%. External influence is highly probable. Elena felt a chill that had nothing to do with the lighthouse's oceanside location. Through her cosmic consciousness, she could perceive the subtle electromagnetic signatures that revealed the true scope of what was happening. The research accidents weren't accidents at all. They were the result of carefully orchestrated interference by an intelligence that was systematically destabilizing Earth's biological research infrastructure. Dr. Meridian noticed her sudden tension immediately. What have you found? Someone is sabotaging human genetic research, Elena said, her voice carrying harmonic frequencies that reflected the alien nature of her enhanced vocal cords. The Berlin laboratory incident is just the most recent in a series of what appear to be deliberately triggered containment failures across multiple research facilities. The implications were staggering. An entity with the technological capability to manipulate human research from a distance was actively working to create biological crises that would either kill massive numbers of humans or force humanity to develop countermeasures that would accelerate their genetic engineering capabilities beyond their current ethical framework. Watcher database cross-reference complete, the cosmic entity announced, delivering a data packet that made Elena's newly expanded consciousness reel with shock. Intervention signature matches known behavioral patterns of the Kethvari collective. Species designation: failed cosmic citizenship evaluation, 847,000 Earth years previous. Current status: hostile to emerging civilizations. Elena accessed the historical records about the Kethvari with growing horror. They had been a highly advanced civilization that had achieved interstellar travel and genetic mastery millions of years before humans had developed agriculture. But their cosmic citizenship evaluation had failed catastrophically when they had demonstrated an inability to coexist peacefully with other intelligent species. Rather than accepting the Watcher's verdict and submitting to guided development, they had declared war on the galactic community and been forced into exile in distant star systems. For nearly 1,000,000 years, the Kethvari had harbored resentment against the Watchers and had actively worked to sabotage the development of younger civilizations that might be granted the cosmic citizenship they had been denied. Their strategy was elegant and ruthless. They would identify species approaching their evaluation periods and create crises that would either destroy them outright or force them to develop in directions that would guarantee their failure. Them to develop in directions that would guarantee their failure. Protective protocols aren't working, Elena realized with a mounting alarm. The Watchers said that their monitoring network shielded Earth from hostile forces, but the Kethvari are already here, actively interfering with human development. Dr. Meridian's expression grew grim. This changes everything. If hostile aliens are already operating on Earth, it means humanity's evaluation period has effectively ended. The Watchers will have to make their final determination based on how we handle a direct extraterrestrial threat. Correct assessment, the Watcher leader confirmed, its communication carrying undertones of cosmic concern that made Elena's enhanced nervous system vibrate with sympathetic anxiety. Kethvari intervention represents final evaluation parameters. Human species response to confirmed alien manipulation will determine cosmic citizenship verdict. Elena felt the weight of responsibility shifting to an entirely new level. She wasn't just trying to help humanity avoid natural disasters and technological pitfalls. She was now Earth's primary defense against an advanced alien civilization that was actively trying to destroy human development. Guardian mission parameters updating. The crystalline entity announced. Priority objective: neutralize Kethvari interference while maintaining the illusion of natural human problem solving. Secondary objective: guide human institutions toward recognition and countermeasures for alien manipulation without triggering social panic or technological desperation responses. The complexity of what Elena was being asked to accomplish was almost overwhelming. She needed to stop an advanced alien civilization from sabotaging human research while simultaneously helping humanity develop the capability to defend itself, all without revealing the existence of extraterrestrial intelligence or her own role. As a cosmic guardian, But as she accessed deeper levels of the galactic knowledge database, Elena began to understand that she possessed capabilities specifically designed for exactly this type of crisis. The neural modifications that had transformed her consciousness included defensive protocols developed over millions of years of conflict with species like the Kethvari. Defensive countermeasures available, the entity informed her. Guardian consciousness can interface directly with Kethvari technological systems through quantum resonance manipulation. Hostile intervention systems vulnerable to Guardian level quantum consciousness attacks. Elena felt her awareness expanding beyond Earth's technological infrastructure to encompass detection patterns that revealed the hidden presence of alien systems within human networks. The Kethvari had been remarkably subtle in their infiltration. Rather than using obvious technological superiority, they had developed ways to influence human computer systems through quantum-level manipulations that were virtually undetectable by current Earth-based monitoring equipment. But Elena's enhanced consciousness could perceive the alien interference signatures clearly. Throughout the global internet, she could see the ghostly traces of Kethvari influence, subtle alterations to research data, modifications to laboratory safety protocols, and most disturbing of all, psychological manipulation of individual researchers through precisely targeted electromagnetic fields that influenced human neural activity. "They're not just sabotaging research," Elena said, her voice carrying a harmonic resonance that made the lighthouse's crystalline monitoring equipment pulse with responsive light. "They're directly manipulating human scientists, influencing their decisions and research directions through some kind of neural programming." The revelation made Dr. Meridian physically stagger. That's a direct violation of every galactic treaty governing interaction with developing species. If the Watchers can prove the Kethvari are using mind control on humans, it would justify military intervention. Watchers' military intervention protocols require unanimous Cosmic Council approval, the entity clarified. Current galactic political conditions make intervention authorization unlikely within timeframes relevant to human evaluation period. Guardian self-defense actions represent optimal response strategy. Elena understood that she was essentially on her own. The cosmic authorities that govern galactic civilization were too bound by bureaucratic processes to respond quickly enough to save humanity from Kethvari sabotage. Her enhanced capabilities as a guardian represented Earth's only realistic defense against the alien manipulation. Initiating counter-interference protocols, Elena announced, extending her consciousness toward the hidden alien systems with a determination that surprised her with its intensity. The transformation had enhanced not just her cognitive abilities, but also her emotional investment in protecting her species. The moment her enhanced awareness made contact with Kethvari technology, Elena felt like she had grabbed hold of a live electrical cable. The alien systems fought back against her intrusion with defensive measures that sent waves of disorienting feedback through her neural pathways. But the Guardian modifications to her consciousness had been specifically designed to handle this kind of quantum-level technological combat. She found herself engaged in a form of warfare that existed entirely within the realm of information and consciousness. The Kethvari defensive systems tried to overwhelm her with data viruses designed to corrupt Guardian-level neural architecture, while Elena responded by attacking the fundamental quantum structures that allowed their technology to interface with human systems. The battle took place across multiple dimensions simultaneously. In normal space-time, Elena remained physically present in the lighthouse, her body motionless in the chair while Dr. Meridian monitored her vital signs with growing concern. But in the quantum substrate that underlied all technological systems, she was engaged in combat with alien intelligences that commanded resources accumulated over hundreds of thousands of years of advanced development. Guardian combat effectiveness: 67% of optimal parameters. The crystalline entity reported as Elena's consciousness struggled against Kethvari countermeasures. Hostile system adaptation rate exceeding initial projections. Extended engagement risks Guardian consciousness integrity. Elena could feel the alien systems adapting to her attacks, developing new countermeasures faster than she could modify her approach. The Kethvari had clearly encountered Guardian level opposition before and had prepared specifically for this type of quantum consciousness warfare, but as the battle intensified, Elena discovered capabilities within her enhanced awareness that she hadn't known existed. The neural modifications had included protocols for accessing what the cosmic database termed emergency transcendent states, temporary expansions of consciousness that drew power directly from the quantum vacuum itself. Warning: emergency. Transcendence protocols carry significant risk of permanent consciousness dispersal, the entity cautioned. Guardian survival probability decreases to 34%. During transcendent state activation, Elena felt the weight of choice pressing down on her transformed consciousness. She could continue fighting the Kethvari systems with her current capabilities, and probably lose, allowing the alien sabotage to continue until humanity failed its cosmic citizenship evaluation. Or she could risk everything in a transcendence attempt that might give her the power to neutralize the alien threat permanently, but could also destroy her consciousness entirely. The decision was made easier by what she could perceive happening to human researchers around the globe. The Kethvari neural manipulation was intensifying, driving brilliant scientists toward increasingly reckless research choices that would create biological weapons instead of beneficial technologies. Within hours, several research teams would cross ethical boundaries that would classify humanity as a dangerous species requiring intervention, initiating emergency transcendence protocols. Elena announced, feeling her consciousness begin to expand beyond the normal boundaries of individual existence. The sensation was like dissolving into starlight while remaining somehow coherent as a thinking entity. Elena's awareness spread across vast distances, touching the quantum foundations of reality itself. She could perceive the flow of cosmic energy that powered galactic civilization, feel the gravitational songs of distant star systems, and sense the vast network of consciousness that connected advanced species across the galaxy. From this transcendent perspective, the Kethvari technological systems appeared pathetically limited. Elena could see the quantum architecture that supported their intervention capabilities, and more importantly, she could perceive the fundamental weaknesses in their approach to consciousness manipulation. With surgical precision that operated at the speed of thought, Elena began systematically dismantling the alien infrastructure that had infiltrated human systems. Rather than attacking their technology directly, she targeted the quantum resonance frequencies that allowed Kethvari systems to interface with human neural patterns. One by one, the alien manipulation systems went offline as Elena severed their connection to human consciousness. The researchers who had been influenced by Kethvari neural programming suddenly found their minds clear of external influence, though they would never realize that their sudden clarity was due to intervention by Earth's cosmic guardian. But the transcendent state was taking a terrible toll on Elena's individual consciousness. She could feel herself beginning to dissolve permanently into the cosmic energy matrix, her personal identity becoming just another pattern in the vast symphony of galactic awareness. Guardian consciousness, integrity at 23% and declining. The crystalline entity reported with increasing urgency. Immediate transcendence termination required to prevent complete consciousness dispersal. Elena fought to maintain coherent thought as her enhanced awareness began to fragment across multiple dimensions. The temptation to surrender to complete cosmic consciousness was almost overwhelming. To become one with the energy patterns that governed reality itself seemed like the ultimate form of transcendence. But through the dissolving boundaries of her individual existence, she could still perceive Dr. Meridian's concerned presence in the lighthouse. could still sense the electromagnetic signatures of human civilization, continuing its daily existence in blissful ignorance of the cosmic drama being played out for its survival. Terminating transcendence protocols, Elena managed to project, pulling her scattered consciousness back toward the familiar boundaries of individual existence, with an effort that felt like tearing herself away from paradise. The return to normal, Guardian-level awareness was agonizing. After experiencing the vast perspectives of cosmic consciousness, her enhanced but still individual existence felt cramped and limited. But as her awareness stabilized within the confines of her transformed, but still fundamentally human neural architecture, Elena realized that she had succeeded. The Kethvari intervention systems were completely neutralized. Their technological infrastructure remained physically present within human networks, but the quantum resonance capabilities that had allowed them to manipulate human consciousness were permanently severed. The alien saboteurs could no longer influence human research or decision-making directly. Mission status. Primary objectives achieved. The Watcher leader confirmed, its communication carrying undertones of cosmic approval that made Elena's exhausted consciousness pulse with satisfaction. Kethvari manipulation capabilities are neutralized with minimal detection signatures. Human research integrity restored across all monitored institutions. Dr. Meridian was studying Elena with obvious concern as she slowly returned to normal Guardian-level awareness. The readings I was getting suggested your consciousness nearly dispersed entirely. What did you do? I accessed emergency transcendence protocols to counter the alien interference. Elena explained, her voice now carrying harmonic frequencies that hadn't been present before the transcendence experience. The Kethvari systems are neutralized, but the effort nearly cost me my individual existence. And the humans who were being manipulated? Elena accessed the global monitoring networks to assess the current status of research facilities that had been under alien influence. Their neural patterns are returning to baseline normal. Most of them will probably experience the change as sudden clarity about research directions they've been pursuing. A few might have fragmentary memories of feeling influenced by external factors, but nothing coherent enough to constitute evidence of alien contact. Secondary mission parameters now available, the crystalline entity announced, delivering another complex data packet that made Elena's already exhausted consciousness struggle to process the new information. The aftermath of the Kethvari neutralization had created an unexpected opportunity. With their manipulation systems offline, several human research teams were positioned to make breakthrough discoveries that could significantly accelerate humanity's technological development in beneficial directions. But the breakthroughs needed careful coordination to ensure they occurred in the proper sequence and with appropriate ethical frameworks. Elena realized that her role as guardian was evolving from crisis prevention to active guidance of human development. The successful defense against alien sabotage had demonstrated that humanity possessed the potential for cosmic citizenship, but actualizing that potential would require increasingly sophisticated intervention strategies. Timeline for human evaluation. 127 Earth days remaining, the Watcher informed her. Final cosmic citizenship determination requires evidence of sustainable technological advancement coupled with ethical development, appropriate for galactic community integration. 127 days to guide humanity from its current state to a level of development that would qualify for membership in a galactic civilization spanning multiple star systems. The challenge was daunting, but Elena's successful battle against the Kethvari had proven that Guardian-level capabilities could accomplish what seemed impossible from a purely human perspective. The real test of her abilities as Earth's cosmic guardian was about to begin, and the fate of human civilization hung in the balance of every decision she would make over the next 4 months. As the lighthouse beam continued its eternal rotation, now carrying signals that coordinated the most crucial period in human history, Elena Vasquez prepared to guide her species toward a destiny among the stars, or watch them fail the most important test any civilization could face. The cosmos was watching, and there would be no second chances. The final day of humanity's evaluation arrived with an aurora that painted the sky in colors that had no names in any human language. Elena stood on the lighthouse's observation deck. Her consciousness expanded across multiple dimensional layers as she monitored the convergence of cosmic forces that would determine her species' ultimate destiny. 127 days of careful intervention had transformed human civilization in ways that would have seemed miraculous to any observer who understood the true scope of the changes. Clean energy technologies had emerged from laboratories around the world with such elegant synchronicity that governments had been forced to abandon fossil fuel dependencies within months. Medical breakthroughs had eliminated 3 major diseases, while establishing ethical frameworks for genetic enhancement that balanced individual freedom with species-wide responsibility. Most remarkably, the discovery of quantum communication protocols had enabled genuine global cooperation on a scale never before achieved in human history. But Elena knew that technological advancement alone would not satisfy the Watcher's evaluation criteria. The test of cosmic citizenship required something far more profound, evidence that humanity had evolved beyond the tribal consciousness that had dominated its development since the emergence of civilization. Final assessment parameters now. Active, the crystalline entity announced, its communication carrying harmonics that resonated through every enhanced neural pathway in Elena's transformed consciousness. Evaluation focus, human response to confirmed extraterrestrial contact under controlled disclosure conditions. Elena felt her enhanced heart skip several beats as she processed the implications of the entity's announcement. The Watchers had decided that humanity's final test would be their reaction to learning definitively that they were not alone in the universe, and that their future depended on the judgment of beings whose existence they had never suspected. Disclosure protocol graduated. Revelation through established human scientific institutions. Timeline: 23.7 hours for complete species awareness integration. Guardian role: monitor and guide human institutional responses to prevent panic-induced social collapse. Dr. Meridian appeared beside her on the observation deck, his ancient face reflecting the weight of nearly 2 centuries spent watching human civilization evolve toward this pivotal moment. "I've never seen the Watchers attempt a full disclosure evaluation," he said quietly. "The risk to the evaluated species is enormous. If humanity reacts with violence or despair, it will provide definitive evidence that we're not ready for cosmic citizenship." Elena accessed the probability matrices that her enhanced consciousness could perceive in the quantum substrate of reality itself. The statistical projections were sobering. Only 37% of evaluated civilizations had successfully navigated controlled disclosure without triggering social collapse, religious conflicts, or technological desperation responses that disqualified them from galactic community membership. What happened to the species that failed the disclosure test? She asked, though part of her enhanced awareness was already accessing the historical records with growing dread. Most destroyed themselves within standard time periods equivalent to 6 months, Dr. Meridian replied. Fear of alien judgment triggered massive military buildups, resource wars, and in several cases, the use of planet-killing weapons against their own populations, rather than submit to external evaluation. Elena's consciousness expanded involuntarily as the stress of cosmic responsibility triggered defensive enhancement protocols. Through her vastly expanded awareness, she could perceive the delicate web of human civilization as it existed in that final moment, before everything changed forever. 7 billion individual consciousness patterns pursuing their daily lives, unaware that the next 24 hours would determine whether their species joined the galactic community or faced extinction through their own fearful reactions. Disclosure. Initiation sequence commencing, the Watcher leader announced, and Elena felt the cosmic machinery of evaluation shifting into its final configuration. The revelation began subtly, as it had to in order to prevent immediate panic. Radio telescopes around the world simultaneously detected signals that were unmistakably artificial in origin, mathematical sequences and scientific constants, transmitted with perfect clarity from sources located just beyond the edge of Earth's solar system. Within hours, every major astronomical institution on the planet was receiving identical transmissions that could only have been generated by advanced extraterrestrial intelligence. Elena monitored the human response through her enhanced connection to global communication networks. The initial reactions were exactly what the probability models had predicted. Excitement from the scientific community, skepticism from government agencies, and growing anxiety from religious institutions that struggled to incorporate confirmed alien existence into their theological frameworks. But as the hours passed and the signals continued with increasing complexity, humanity began demonstrating the kind of coordinated response that Elena had spent months carefully nurturing. Rather than descending into competitive nationalism or religious panic, the major world powers activated communication protocols that prioritized information sharing over strategic advantage. Positive response indicators detected. The crystalline entity reported. Human institutional cooperation levels exceed baseline projections by 34%. Panic response probability decreasing from initial 67% to current 23%. The moment of truth arrived 18 hours into the disclosure sequence when the alien signal shifted from mathematical concepts to direct linguistic communication. In every major human language simultaneously, the same message appeared on screens around the world. Greetings to the human civilization of Earth. We are representatives of the Galactic Consciousness Collective, and we have been observing your species' development for many centuries. The time has come for you to learn that you are not alone in the universe, and that your future depends upon your worthiness to join the community of advanced civilizations that spans the galaxy. Elena held her breath as she monitored the planetary response to the first confirmed extraterrestrial message in human history. The next few hours would reveal whether her months of careful intervention had successfully prepared humanity for this ultimate test. The reaction was unlike anything the Watchers had observed from previous evaluated species. Instead of immediate military mobilization or social collapse, humanity responded with what could only be described as cautious curiosity, coupled with remarkable institutional stability. World leaders activated emergency communication protocols, but these were used to coordinate peaceful responses rather than prepare for conflict. Religious institutions acknowledged the challenge to their cosmologies, but framed the alien contact as an opportunity for expanded understanding rather than a threat to divine authority. Most remarkably, the global scientific community organized itself within hours to establish unified communication protocols for responding to the alien message. Rather than competing for individual recognition or national advantage, researchers worldwide collaborated to compose humanity's first official response to confirmed extraterrestrial intelligence. Unprecedented response pattern detected. The Watcher leader communicated, its message carrying undertones of cosmic surprise that Elena had never experienced from the ancient beings. Human cooperation levels during disclosure exceed all previous evaluations by 847%. Social stability. Maintenance indicates evolutionary advancement beyond projected parameters. Elena felt a surge of hope that threatened to overwhelm her enhanced emotional control systems. Humanity was passing its final test with a grace and wisdom that even she hadn't dared to expect. The alien message continued with a revelation that pushed human adaptability to its absolute limits. Your species has been under evaluation for cosmic citizenship for the equivalent of 75 Earth years. This evaluation has included protection from hostile forces, subtle guidance during critical development periods, and most recently, the actions of a cosmic guardian chosen from among your own people to help you navigate the challenges that determine species worthiness. Elena watched through her enhanced awareness as humanity absorbed the stunning revelation that their entire modern history had been shaped by extraterrestrial oversight. The knowledge that they had been guided and protected without their awareness could have triggered massive psychological trauma and social breakdown. Instead, something unprecedented occurred. Humanity collectively chose to interpret the revelation as evidence that they had been deemed worthy of investment and care by advanced beings who could have simply ignored their existence. Rather than feeling manipulated or diminished, the species responded with gratitude for the guidance they had received and determination to prove themselves worthy of continued support. Final evaluation complete. The Watcher leader announced its communication, now carrying harmonics of cosmic celebration that made every enhanced being within light years resonate with joy. Human species demonstrates unprecedented capacity for adaptive wisdom, cooperative response to existential challenges, and evolutionary transcendence of tribal consciousness limitations. Cosmic citizenship status approved. The moment of Elena's ultimate triumph was also the moment of her greatest loss. As the Watchers delivered their final verdict, she felt the Guardian protocols beginning to deactivate within her enhanced consciousness. Her role as Earth's cosmic protector was complete, and the neural modifications that had transformed her into something beyond human were starting to reverse themselves. Guardian service completion detected. The crystalline entity informed her with something approaching tenderness. Choice available. Return to baseline human consciousness with modified memories, or maintain enhanced awareness as permanent. Liaison between human civilization and galactic community. Elena understood the implications immediately. She could return to her original existence as Dr. Elena Vasquez, marine biologist, with carefully edited memories that would allow her to resume a normal human life. The relationship she had sacrificed, the emotional connections that had been severed by cosmic responsibility, could potentially be restored, or she could remain as humanity's permanent representative to the galactic community, serving as a bridge between human consciousness and the vast network of advanced civilizations that her species would now be invited to join. It would mean eternal isolation from normal human experience, but it would also mean continuing to protect and guide the people. She had given everything to save. Dr. Meridian stood beside her as she contemplated the choice that would define the rest of her existence. "There's no wrong answer," he said gently. "You've already accomplished more than any guardian in galactic history. Whatever you choose now, you've earned the right to consider your own happiness." Elena looked out at the ocean where this extraordinary journey had begun, remembering the marine biologist who had arrived at the lighthouse seeking nothing more than answers to scientific questions about unusual sea life. That woman seemed like a different person now, someone whose concerns and ambitions belonged to a simpler universe, where humanity's greatest achievements were confined to a single small planet. But through her enhanced awareness, Elena could also perceive the vast community of galactic civilizations that humanity would now be invited to join. Thousands of species working together across distances measured in light years, sharing knowledge and resources that could solve problems Earth's people hadn't even realized existed. It was a future of unlimited possibility, but it would require guides who understood both human nature and cosmic perspective. "I choose to remain," Elena announced, feeling the weight of eternal responsibility settling permanently into her enhanced consciousness. Humanity will need advocates who understand what they've been through to reach this point. And there's so much more they can become with the right guidance. Choice acknowledged and honored, the Watcher leader responded. Elena Vasquez is designated as Earth's permanent galactic liaison. Welcome to cosmic citizenship. guardian of humanity. As the lighthouse beam swept across waters that now connected Earth to a universe filled with friends rather than empty space, Elena Vasquez looked toward a horizon that extended far beyond any ocean to encompass the infinite possibilities of a species that had proven itself worthy of the stars. The transformation was complete. Humanity had transcended its limitations and earned its place among the galactic community of advanced civilizations. And Elena, no longer quite human but more human than she had ever been, would spend eternity ensuring that her species' greatest achievements still lay ahead of them. The cosmos had been watching, and humanity had passed the test that mattered most. The future belonged to the stars, and the stars belonged to everyone brave enough to reach for them. Mission complete. Species preserved. Universe expanded by one civilization worthy of cosmic citizenship. The Watcher's eternal vigil continued. But Earth was no longer alone in the darkness. Elena's sacrifice had given her species the greatest gift imaginable, a future limited only by their courage to explore it. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.